Hi there, it's Mr. Layman, and today we're going to be doing 8.4a, which is all about Enlightenment theory in the Age of Enlightenment and how it specifically relates to U.S. history. So the first word we're going to talk about today is philosophy, and a philosophy is how you think about something. It's just a study of thought. And there's lots of things that could fall under a philosophy. You could have an economic philosophy, a religious philosophy. You could have a philosophy about what makes a good video game. But today we're going to be talking about the philosophy of government. After the Reformation and the Renaissance of the early modern age brought old ideas from places like Greece and Rome, Persia, Byzantium, the Islamic Caliphate, back into light, new ideas begin to grow from these concepts of the past. This is influenced by things like trade, because trade not only spreads around resources and money, but trade also moves around ideas as people move around. Many philosophers and great thinkers begin to write books that are focused on their perspectives in terms of reality. This reality is also constructed from new provable ideas about science. Theories about gravity and motion being testable and provable, and these are also theories that you can repeat, they don't need to be fully understood to make sense. As long as it's measured, it can be conceptually grasped. You don't need to exactly know what gravity is, or you don't need to know why there is gravity to be able to use gravity. If I'm trying to shoot a bow and arrow, understanding gravity is going to tell me that, okay, everything falls at the same rate. So if I drop something over here and there's an arrow flying through the air, if I'm firing the arrow straight, they're both going to drop at the same rate. You can try this at home by crumbling up a ball of paper and taking an entire textbook, drop them, they will both hit the ground at the same time. Even though the textbook probably weighs hundreds of times what the crumbled up piece of paper weighs. Many of these philosophers, particularly the ones that had an influence on U.S. philosophy, were English and were directly involved in some way in the English Civil War, which was mostly fought over government and religion, and the 30 Years' War, which is fought over religion, and various other smaller wars fought over a mix of either governmental strife or religious zeal. This is one of the main reasons why the U.S. Constitution has a separation of religion and government. Usually we call this church and state, because a lot of these philosophers view government and religion, when you smash them together, they tend to create conflict. So a lot of these philosophies are around, hey, I was in a war, it was terrible, I don't want to have that happen again. We're going to start with John Locke. While he's not the first philosopher on this list, his philosophy is more apparent in terms of what we're going to talk about today. John Locke's primary document for today is two treatises on government, which is a writing. He has a lot of different kinds of political philosophies, but that's the one we're going to focus on today. It's written in 1689. Do you remember what else came out in 1689? I can't hear you, but I'm going to assume that someone at some point, somewhere watching this, said the English Bill of Rights. And the English Bill of Rights, as we learned about previously, includes things like the right to have free speech in the parliament and the right to not just be imprisoned randomly by a king, things like that. John Locke and a lot of philosophers during this time period have an idea about something called the state of nature. And according to John Locke, the state of nature is this. People, he uses the term mankind, live in a world of physical reality. Before government, this was a perfect way to live. It was a utopia. People were not commanded by rules. They ruled themselves. They do not need anyone, but they kind of need each other and can work as a group, as nature itself is often in harmony and balance. This can be very peaceful. I want to say that when he talks about peaceful, he means not in a warlike context. He means that there is a natural equilibrium of things. If you have wolves and deer in the forest, you will have an equilibrium between number of wolves that are there and number of deer that are there. We find this happens when you hunt a lot of deer. the wolf population extremely decreases. Or if you hunt a lot of wolves, the deer population increases, and then a lot of them end up starving to death. So when we look at things like, oh, you're tampering with this natural world, it tends to stay in balance fairly predictably. And as long as you're not messing around with it, it will sort of equal itself out. He's saying that you don't necessarily need a government to tell you what to do, especially on a smaller scale. People will choose to survive at that most basic level and should not assume that something will save them, especially government or religion, or sometimes these people refer to something called magical thinking, which is assuming that some sort of outside force will just fix everything. He doesn't believe that government is a benevolent, godlike force either, and that government is created out of the people, it's not handed down from above, or it's not some form of like dogmatic ideology. He's saying you create your own space, and that is a better way to live than having something forced on you. To be fair, that's a giant reflection of the English Bill of Rights, which was the Parliament in England making rules not only for themselves, but rules for their leaders and creating a more equitable government. According to John Locke, government ideally should be weak, and the people should work together for their own collective good. You don't need to be told what to do or harshly punished. There are some behaviors that people do not want in a society, and that society is going to decide what those behaviors are, and then judge those individuals that are violating that sort of social contract of how people have decided to live. A strong government often gives itself too much power and will oppress the people under it. I usually would do this example in my classrooms. Like if a student is calling out during class, I'm not going to have them imprisoned. Like the cops aren't going to show up if you don't hand in your homework. So it's not like that punishment that you might receive is an overreaction. You want something that's fair. Ideally, everyone kind of wants that equilibrium balance between being way too nice and being way too harsh. Strictness is maybe a better word, that you have a strict set of rules that you follow, but you all kind of agree to what those rules ideally should be. According to Locke, freedom is total and absolute. People are naturally good, so they make good choices. Interestingly, there's been a lot of research in this in terms of video games, where there's a lot of video games now where it's not just run to the right and jump over pipes and break bricks with your fist like Mario. There's a lot of games that involve choice, either a good option or an evil option. Typically, people that are given that choice, well over 90% of the time, they choose the good option because gameplay-wise, as a mechanic, is generally more beneficial to be nice than it is to be objectively evil. So we see this as sort of a sociological element, even in things that are pretend, or that are games, or that are fantasy, that have no real-world outcome. Even in those situations, being helpful and naturally good is an objectively better choice. Now, maybe you could say that's from the person who wrote the game or the person who created the scenario that you're put in, but even then, it's sort of assuming that people will be A, good, and B, it is helpful to therefore be good. Another main concept of John Locke is this idea of something called a tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate. All people start from a place of neutrality or are empty, and your experiences fill you up. If your experience involve hate or greed or love, then that is going to be your perception on the world. And experiences are never identical. No two people have exactly the same set of experiences. And as you go through life, the more experiences you have, the more you are filled up. And that sort of past that is yours influences your present, which then builds into your future, which if you've had classes with me is a pretty on the nose recurring theme. Locke believes that education is the most important thing you can do for a society, and that the health of a society should be the most important way that you can improve everyone, and a healthy society should have educated people in it. If everyone is good and educated, and we strive to make sure that people tend to have good experiences as opposed to negative experiences, you won't have a society where suffering can very easily exist, because the people will not want to choose suffering for others because they've been taught and experienced a world where suffering is limited. In this way, you barely even need a government if the people are sufficiently educated and aware. So Locke is arguing for generally a smaller government. Locke is arguing for things like your experiences form who you are, so we should try to build a society where people have more good experiences than bad experiences. And Locke is also saying that education is the key to everything and that people are naturally good. Thomas Hobbes is on the other side of this coin. He writes something called the Leviathan, which is a book, and he writes it in 1651. This is after the 30 Years' War, and it's during the English Civil War. His experiences have taught him that a lot of life is a blood-soaked nightmare of pain. So he's aware of things that have been generally negative. The 30 Years' War caused 8 million people in Europe to starve to death. So it's a problem. For context, by the way, World War I was about 10 million people dying, and there were a lot more people on the planet. So the 30 Years' War was rough. He writes the Leviathan during the English Civil War. Hobbes is highly impacted by this conflict, and it's evident in his writing and philosophy. Thomas Hobbes's take on the state of nature is that people are naturally selfish and greedy and brutal to one another in a fight to survive. People only know what is true by way of experience, which I'd say is a fair argument, and all experience has an aspect of suffering. Oddly, well, Thomas Hobbes is not a Buddhist. This is like the entire concept behind Buddhism, that everything kind of boils down to wants and suffering. For Hobbes, suffering includes things like hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain. According to Hobbes, there is no real right or wrong morally. It's either survive or don't. A wolf eating a deer is not evil. That's just the wolf surviving. So I don't look at the wolf as evil and the deer as good. I look at the deer as trying to survive and the wolf as trying to survive. According to Hobbes, life is, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Eesh. Because everyone looks out for themselves first and the group second, everyone will fight everyone else in a state of lawless chaos if they are allowed to. In Hobbes's state of nature, it's just everyone versus everyone else. You're just trying to survive. This is nature, the strongest fight over resources until a balance is met. Someone has gained the resources that they need. Done. That is the balance part, but them gaining those resources is not objectively good or evil if they're just trying to make it. People need authority, though, to keep them in line, as they are naturally selfish. If you've ever met a toddler, they're usually like, give me this, give me this, give me this, give me this. They can be rather selfish. So he's saying that naturally people are selfish. Let's say you're in a room with 10 other people in it. I'm going to give someone $100. Point to the person who gets $100. You probably choose yourself, according to Hobbes. Or, hey, let's say that if, there's 10 of us in a room together and there is a fire, one person is going to escape. Point to that person. You're probably pointing to yourself. So that sort of selfishness is very natural, according to Hobbes, and you should not look for others to take care of you unless it's also benefiting them in some sort of selfish way. If it's better for them to help you, then that is also selfish. You could become more educated about people, and maybe that'll make you less selfish, or at least altruistic and selfish. But without that, you're just going to look out for yourself, much like a soldier on a highly deadly battlefield in the English Civil War. I mean, bottom line, I just don't want to take a billhook to the face. So let's get back to the Leviathan, again, written in 1651. The Leviathan is a book about a sort of monstrous machine creature that rules everything it possibly can. You, as an individual, because the world is harsh and brutal, can't possibly fight it. And you probably shouldn't. But you should want that Leviathan to help your interests. Your best bet is to join that monstrous machine. The reason being that it's not going to harm itself. And if you are part of it, why would it want to hurt you? Obeying the Leviathan gives you its power. I used to do this thing called the hand in the door argument. And I used to say, hey, I have this whiteboard, and I'm going to close this whiteboard in the door. And I would slam, slam, slam the door on the whiteboard. And the students would go, oh, okay. And then I'd put my hand in the door. And the students would go, oh, he's going to slam the door on his hand. And I'm like, why would I do that? And it's like, no, it's not going to work. I smashed this old shoebox in the door, but not my hand. I smashed the textbook in the door, but not my hand. I smashed the old whiteboard in the door, but not my hand. My hand is a part of me, and it has value, so I will not harm it. My hand, in a way, is then motivated to obey me. If my hand somehow didn't obey me or was working against me, like if it starts to strangle me, like against my will, then I might get rid of it. If it is objectively harmful to me, then I'll get rid of it. Sort of like a cancer. Like a cancer is just an uncontrolled cell growth, but it's a part of you. And you might go, hey, this uncontrolled cell growth is getting out of control. I might want to cut that out. Right, because it's harming you. Oh, but it's a part of me. Yeah, if it's harming you, it's got to go. It's like getting your wisdom teeth pulled. Oh my gosh, these wisdom teeth are terrible and they're messing up my face. Right. Pull them. Oh, but they're a part of me. Right, but they are harmful. They are working against you. If you're not going to obey, why would the Leviathan care about you? Again, it's looking out for its own interest, and you're either following it or you're helping it. But it's kind of one or the other. You're either working with it or working against it. This is a very utilitarian idea. How useful is someone to a society? But for Hobbes, it's also how harmful is someone to a society. There's this idea that if you're making things worse, that's bad. It's better to follow a strong leader than just have complete anarchy. Like on a battlefield. Have a plan and follow a leader, or you're probably going to get killed. If the leader is objectively terrible and harmful, though, do not follow it. This leads into Hobbes' idea about government, that people need to give up their natural rights to a Leviathan that looks out for their self-interests. But if that Leviathan is not doing that, you are under no obligation to obey it, and you should overthrow it because it's not protecting you. It's not looking out for your self-interests. It's acting chaotically. And according to Hobbes, that's no better than the state of nature anyway. So I'm not going to take orders from something that's no better than the worst option. Hobbes doesn't like the state of nature. And if the Leviathan is acting like the state of nature, no need of it. Overthrow it. Get rid of it. If it is not doing its duty, why is it even there? Because it would say the same thing about you. This authority is part of a social contract that we make and recognizes that something is strong enough to protect all of us, because otherwise we will be chaotic and we will selfishly exploit one another. You should be part of a strong government, but if that government is not helping you, you should not obey it and you should overthrow it. Bottom line, both of these philosophers, Locke and Hobbes, believe in education, that education is objectively helpful to a society, either so you can know how an action can be benevolently good and helpful, or to know when a leader is selfishly acting against you and harming you. Many of these ideas take hold in America and form a lot of the political philosophy of the United States. We're going to explore a lot more of that in depth in the rest of this unit. There's probably a worksheet attached to this, depending on where you're watching it, about Locke and Hobbes and their political philosophies. So feel free to work on that at your leisure. And otherwise, I hope you have a super awesome cool day. Take care.